It was a bitterly cold autumn morning, the kind that painted frost along the edges of every leaf and made even the wind sound tired. At the edge of a sleepy town in the Midwest, nestled between fields that had already turned gold and brown, sat a small animal shelter. Weathered by time, surrounded by silence. The staff had just arrived, their breath forming little clouds as they fumbled with keys and coffee cups. Birds stirred in the nearby trees, and the gravel crunched beneath heavy boots. But what stopped them all was the shape lying just outside the gate. At first, no one moved. It looked like a shadow, just a large, still form slumped against the iron bars of the entrance. "Is that a dog?" someone whispered. The closer they got, the clearer it became. A German shepherd, barely more than skin stretched over bones. His fur was dirty, matted, falling off in patches. His ribs showed with every labored breath, if he was breathing at all. "God," murmured a young volunteer named Lisa, dropping to her knees. "I think he's gone." She reached out with one gloved hand to touch him, gently, almost reverently, expecting cold. But the dog twitched. A small, almost imperceptible shiver ran through his thin frame. His head moved just slightly, and then, very slowly, his eyes opened. They were dull, clouded, tired, but not dead. Lisa gasped and called out, "He's alive! Someone bring a blanket, now!" The others rushed into action, but the dog, he didn't bark, didn't growl. He didn't even flinch when they touched him. He just lay there, his gaze drifting somewhere far beyond them, as if his body had arrived, but his spirit was still too broken to follow. One of the older shelter workers, Henry, stood watching with a heavy heart. "What kind of hell did you crawl out of, buddy?" he muttered. No collar, no tag, no microchip, just a silent, nameless creature who had somehow dragged himself to the one place that might still offer a second chance. They carried him inside, wrapped in an old flannel sheet. He didn't resist. He didn't react. They placed him in a quiet kennel at the far end, far from the barking of the others. "Poor guy, doesn't even lift his head," someone said that afternoon. "Hasn't made a sound." They called him Shadow. It fit, not because of his coloring, but because that's what he'd become. A shadow of the dog he once was. A ghost with no voice, no hope, and no visible will left to live. Later that evening, as the last staff member turned off the lights and locked the doors, Shadow still hadn't moved from the blanket. His eyes stayed open, staring through the bars. And yet, despite everything, he had made it here. Somehow, something inside him had still wanted to reach that gate, but for now, he lay in the dark, motionless, waiting. Not for food, not for a home, just for a reason. The door to the shelter creaked open again just before noon. Cold air rushed in, followed by a woman in a thick coat and scarf, one hand holding a small cane, the other gently guiding her daughter forward. "Careful, June," the woman whispered. The girl was tense light, pale, with light brown hair pulled into a loose ponytail. She wore dark sunglasses and carried a white folding cane, which tapped softly against the tile floor as she moved. June had been blind since the age of 4, after a car accident left her with permanent damage to both eyes. Since then, the world had become sound, scent, and touch. She rarely spoke to strangers, never played with other kids. She kept to herself, quiet, distant, safe. But her mother had seen the sadness, the ache in her daughter's silences. And so today, after speaking with a therapist, she brought her to the shelter. Not to adopt, necessarily, but to see, to feel, to maybe find connection again, even if only for a moment. A volunteer led them down the rows of kennels. Dogs barked, tails wagged against metal bars, eager eyes tracked every movement. "This one's great with kids," the woman offered cheerfully. "Only 2 years old. Very playful." June turned her head toward the barking, but didn't step forward. She only shook her head slightly and kept walking. They tried another, then another, but nothing seemed to reach her. She paused occasionally, listening, sniffing, reaching a tentative hand toward the bars, only to pull it back before contact. Then, as they reached the edge of the main kennel area, June stopped, tilted her head. "What's that sound?" she asked quietly. The volunteer frowned. "What sound?" June pointed with her cane to a quiet hallway near the back. "It's not a sound. It's a space. It feels sad." The volunteer exchanged a glance with her mother. "That area's closed off," she said softly. "There's only one dog back there. He's not doing very well." June didn't answer. She just turned and began walking toward it, step by step, her cane tapping gently ahead. They reached the isolation room. Through a cracked door, a single kennel sat beneath a flickering overhead light. Inside lay Shadow, still thin, barely more than breath and bone. June stopped just outside the bars. "Is he sleeping?" she asked. "No," the volunteer murmured. "He's awake, he just doesn't move much." June slowly knelt on the cold floor. She didn't flinch when her knee brushed dirt. She didn't hesitate when the musty scent of matted fur reached her. She simply reached forward, carefully, her hand trembling slightly. "Hey there," she whispered. I can't see you, but I know you're hurting." Her fingers found the dog's head, bony, cold, still, and then, as everyone watched in stunned silence, Shadow breathed in deeply. For the first time in days, his body shifted, a slow, quiet groan. Then his head lifted, just slightly. His nose bumped gently into her palm, and then he exhaled, soft, trembling, but real. The volunteer gasped. "He hasn't done that for anyone. Not once." June smiled faintly. "He knows I understand." And in that moment, no one spoke, no one moved, because somehow, in the quiet between one broken soul and another, something invisible had passed between them, something neither blindness nor pain could hide. Hope. June named him Echo. "It fits," she said softly as she ran her fingers through the rough fur along his back. "Because you don't have to see me. You just have to hear me." Her mother smiled with quiet wonder. In the end, she agreed to foster Echo temporarily, though something about the way the dog leaned into June's touch made it clear this was no temporary bond. The first few days at home were hard. Echo barely moved from the corner of June's room, where they had placed a thick folded quilt for him. He didn't eat much. Loud noises made him tremble, the creak of the floorboards, the clang of the heater, even the rustling of June's cane tapping gently along the wall. But June didn't give up. Every morning she sat near him on the floor and quietly played her little ukulele. The soft strumming filled the room with warmth. Sometimes she hummed. Sometimes she just talked. To Echo, to the silence, to herself. At night, she'd lay on the floor beside him, one hand resting lightly on his side, and tell him story about the stars she remembered from before the accident, about what colors used to look like, about how it felt, sometimes, to live in the dark. "You're not alone," she whispered once. "I know what it's like to be scared all the time." Echo never barked, but he listened. His ears twitched when she played. His body leaned a little closer when she told him her secrets, and soon, ever so gently, his tail began to thump when she entered the room. A few weeks in, Echo began to change. He started eating without coaxing. He followed the sound of June's cane from room to room, and when she tapped a small bell she'd tied to her ukulele case, he came without hesitation. But the moment that changed everything came one quiet afternoon in the backyard. June was exploring the garden with her cane, tapping lightly against flower pots and fence posts. Echo lay under a tree nearby, half dozing, as he often did. Suddenly, her cane caught on a stone. She tripped and fell forward with a sharp cry, landing hard on the grass. Echo's head shot up instantly. He bounded to her side with more strength than anyone had seen in him before. Standing over her, he let out a sharp, urgent bark, his first bark since arriving. Inside the house, June's mother froze. Then she heard it again, louder, more frantic. She ran outside to find Echo standing between June and the world, tail rigid, body still, eyes locked in her direction. When she rushed to her daughter, Echo didn't move from his post, not until he was sure June was safe in her mother's arms. June clung to her mother, laughing through a few stray tears. "I'm okay," she whispered, but he knew. Echo nudged her hand with his nose, then pressed his body against her like a warm shield. After that day, no one questioned where he belonged. They weren't healing apart. They were healing together. The sun was warm that Saturday afternoon, filtered through the tall trees of the local park. The breeze carried the scent of pine and freshly cut grass, and somewhere nearby, children laughed as they chased each other around picnic tables, and kites soared overhead. June walked slowly along a paved path, one hand wrapped around her mother's arm, the other gripping her cane. Echo padded beside her, alert but calm, his ears always tuned to the gentle jingle of the bell attached to June's wrist. It had become their weekend tradition. Fresh air, soft music on a speaker, and a few quiet hours away from the weight of everyday life. Echo had adjusted remarkably well. He no longer cowered at sudden sounds. His body had filled out. His coat, though still patchy in places, had regained its shine, and his eyes, though always cautious, now held something that hadn't been there before: purpose. They were passing near the edge of a large lake, a peaceful corner of the park, bordered by weeping willows and tall reeds. Several families were gathered nearby, blankets spread out, toddlers playing in the grass. Then it happened. A splash, quick, sharp, out of place. Then a cry, high-pitched, panicked. June froze. "What was that?" she whispered. Her mother had already turned toward the lake, her expression changing. "I think, oh God, someone's in the water." Echo heard it too. Before anyone could react, he was gone, his body a blur of motion as he tore across the grass, cutting through the crowd with laser focus. Several adults shouted, running after him, but Echo had already reached the water's edge. A little boy, no more than 4, was flailing near the reeds. His tiny hands slapped the water, trying to stay afloat, his face barely above the surface. Echo didn't hesitate. With a single leap, he plunged into the lake. Water exploded around him. The crowd gasped. Echo swam fast, powerfully. His head was low, his legs cutting through the current with purpose. He reached the child in seconds, clamped his teeth gently around the boy's soaked sleeve, and began pulling him back. The boy coughed, choked, then let go of panic just long enough to hold on. Echo dragged him until his tiny feet could touch the lake's shallow edge. Adults rushed in. Hands grabbed the boy, lifting him up and wrapping him in blankets. One woman sobbed, clutching her son to her chest. Echo, drenched and trembling, climbed back onto the grass and shook, water flying in every direction. His eyes searched until they found June. She stood a few feet away, her hands outstretched, listening. "Echo?" she called, voice soft but sure. He limped toward her, worn out but proud. When he reached her, June dropped to her knees and wrapped her arms around his soaked neck. "You did it," she whispered into his fur. "I knew you would. You saved him." She pressed her cheek against his, voice trembling. "Just like you saved me." Echo didn't move. He didn't need to. His heart, once broken and empty, had found its place. And in the cheers and sobs of strangers he stood, a silent, soaked, and shining reminder that even those left for dead can rise again to save another. 2 years passed like pages turning in a quiet book. Echo, once the broken stray left for dead, had become June's shadow, her guardian, her heart. His once weakened body had grown stronger for a time, but now his steps were slower. His muzzle had gone white. His naps were longer. Yet he never let June leave a room without following. And June, now 12, had changed too. She walked with more confidence, held her cane with purpose, and smiled easily. She went to school, made friends, and volunteered with her mom at the local shelter every weekend, gently guiding her hands over scared puppies, sitting in silence with anxious dogs. "I know what it's like," she would whisper, "to wait for someone who sees more than what's on the outside." But one winter morning, the world shifted. June woke and reached her hand to the end of her bed, where Echo always slept. The space was empty. "Mom?" she called softly. Her mother appeared, voice calm but quiet. "Come with me, sweetheart." She led June out back, her arms steady. The garden was covered in frost. Beneath the tall tree where Echo loved to lay in summer afternoons, a familiar shape rested, still, peaceful. Echo had chosen his place, beneath the tree, near the warmth of the home he had found, the home he had guarded until his last breath. June knelt beside him, hands brushing gently over his fur. She didn't cry at first. She just leaned in close, whispering through the quiet, "Thank you for finding me." Later that day they buried Echo beneath the tree, planting fresh flowers around the spot. On a small smooth stone, carved in raised braille and ink, were the words, "You didn't need sight to see me. You found me with your heart." Seasons passed, and in time, a new life joined their home. A nervous young rescue dog with too many scars and not enough trust. June, now older, calmer, and wiser, began the work Echo had taught her. She sat beside the frightened dog, whispered softly, and played her ukulele once more, because now she was the one helping others see. Not with eyes, but with love. If this story touched your heart, like it did ours, you're not alone, because sometimes it takes a blind girl to show us how to truly see. And sometimes the most broken souls become the ones who heal us most. Echo may have arrived at that shelter with nothing left, but what he found with June was everything. A second chance, a purpose, a forever love. If you believe in stories where hope comes limping through the gate, where love speaks louder than words, and where every tail wag is a quiet miracle, then don't forget to like, share, and most importantly, subscribe to Amazing Paws Stories. We're here to remind you that in this world, no soul is ever too lost to be found. We'll see you in the next story.